Peter Okwoche, journalist for BBC Africa. 3 days after the war started, I reported from the Polish border with Ukraine. I needed to go there and talk to these people myself, touch flesh with them. I found Africans fleeing the war were treated like second-class citizens.
Man, these people left without taking the blacks, man. None of the blacks, man.
Only Ukrainians, that's all. That if you are black, you should walk.
I don't want this part of the story to overshadow what's happening in Ukraine. The Ukrainians are being bullied, but if in turn the Ukrainians are bullying a small group of people, I think that story should be told as well. The Ukrainian government has promised to spare no effort to solve the problem. A report has reached us today that the Russian army has surrounded the southern port city of Kherson. Away from the borders, many Africans were still trapped in cities across Ukraine. There were still so many of them who were desperate to go out.
But this is not our war. We have nothing to do with this. They should let us go home.
And the most scary part is when guns were openly given to everybody.
How long are you going to stay in the basement?
It was really difficult to get in touch with a lot of the people.
Not Our War. That is the name of the documentary that was put together by BBC, led by Mr. Peter Okwoche. And of course, he is a presenter on BBC Focus on Africa. It was pertinent that he traveled to Ukraine to experience firsthand what Africans especially were going through after we saw videos flood social media of how they were being treated, as against the Ukrainians who were being prevented from crossing the border and all of that. It was heartbreaking to even hear stories and see videos of women, men, children who were stuck at the various borders, especially the Polish border, and were not being allowed to cross into the other country, unlike the other white people who were allowed to cross. And it was just heartbreaking. It's great that we get to see firsthand what exactly happened at these borders. And Peter Okwoche was there to record and tell us all about this. He joins us via Zoom this morning, all the way from the UK, I believe. And he's going to run us through why it was important even to put together this documentary. Good morning, Peter.
Good morning, Bella. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us on the show. And first of all, I must say that great job. Kudos on doing this. I can just imagine what you were going through even before, you headed to Ukraine to record exactly what was happening there. But tell me a bit about what exactly led to wanting to travel to Ukraine to cover this.
Well, Bella, when this war started on the 24th of February. I mean, we all woke up in the morning of the 24th of February to find out that Russia had actually invaded Ukraine.
Yeah.
And we saw pictures, immediately we saw pictures and, footage on social media about how Africans who were trying to flee the war were being treated vis-a-vis how the Ukrainians were being treated as well.
Yeah.
And as this went on for a couple of days, we at the BBC realized that, no mainstream media was talking about this. And this is an important aspect of the story as well. So 3 days after the war started, I decided to fly, the BBC decided that I should fly to Przemyśl, a town called Przemyśl in eastern Poland, just by the border with Ukraine, to go and see what was happening and talk to these Africans who were fleeing the war and get their experiences, because we believed, and it's certainly true, that everybody's experience and everybody's story needed to be told.
Were you shocked at what you saw, or were you expectant of it, especially because there were already pictures online?
Listen, the pictures didn't paint the actual picture of what was, or the actual experience of what we found there. There were thousands of people. Don't forget that in the first 3 days or so, almost 500,000 people had fled from Ukraine.
Yeah.
And thousands and thousands of Africans who had also fled. And when you went there and you talked to them, and even just the blank stares in their face, people who had everything just 24 hours ago and at that moment had nothing and didn't know what the future held for them. I mean, I've covered wars across the African continent before. So, you kind of expect these kind of things. But within a week of this war started, 1.5 million people had fled Ukraine.
Yeah.
And up until now, about 5 million people have fled. That's 10 of the Ukrainian population.
Yeah.
It's amazing. This is meant to be a first world country.
First world country, and you think that even at that time, when your race should not determine your chance of survival, unfortunately, again, Africans were being treated, wrongly and unfairly. How did you feel about that? I remember you said in your documentary that it wasn't until, you were also sort of, I wouldn't say attacked, but you were questioned based on your race as well. And they were asking you for your BBC ID card and all that. That is when you really, really understood what the Africans were going through.
You're right, Bella. I mean, and for them to even say that it was worse on the Ukrainian side, you just couldn't fathom it. I mean, I've lived in Europe I've lived in the UK for 18 years. Before that, I'd lived in Europe before, and I've traveled all over the world. So I do know what racism is. I tend to expect it when I go to certain parts of the world. And unfortunately, this part of Poland was where I knew it was possible for it to happen. I mean, these guys just targeted myself and my cameraman simply because we were black, asking us, what are you guys doing here? What are you guys doing here? You know, we told them we're BBC journalists, and they asked us for our ID cards, and then they let us go. They didn't touch us. They didn't harm us.
Okay.
But, it's a very uncomfortable feeling. And these guys who were crossing over from Poland were saying that it was worse. And what I found really curious was the fact that when I interviewed the Ukrainian ambassador to South Africa, she flatly denied it.
Yeah.
She flatly denied it, only for the Ukrainian government a few weeks later to come out and say, yes, we acknowledge that this is happening. The UNHCR said the same thing. The Ukrainian government said we're going to try and put a stop to it, and that any African that wants to leave Ukraine should be allowed to leave freely.
And it wasn't until then that we started seeing some respect, at least being given generally to Africans. For me, that was heartbreaking, because I didn't expect that the government would have to speak before they realized that even at the time of war, at the time of death maybe, everyone still deserved to be treated equally. And you were there for a while. What did you encounter with regards to even just the regular people on the streets, Ukrainians, non-Africans? Because you said that later, when you interacted with some of these Africans, it was not until you said, oh, Chale, and then they realized you're one of them, and so they warmed up to you. But even the non-Africans, regularly, how were they treating you? Was it only just that one experience at the Polish border that made you realize that, well, racism here is real? Or was it
not at all.
A continuous
not at all.
thing?
So Przemysl, where we were, it was a very small town of about 60,000 people. There weren't many hotels there. So when we got there, we had to put up in a kind of like a hostel almost, you know. And, the ladies who ran the hostel, they told us openly that we've never seen so many black people before. Guess how many black people they were talking about in the hostel? It was just me and my camera person.
Wow.
So it was kind of like strange. So it was just two of us. There were a couple of Japanese gentlemen there as well. But we were just the two black people. But they said they'd never seen so many black people before. And, after a while, there was a rumor circulating on social media about a migrant crime wave. So migrants committing crimes, which was a lie. The mayor of the city came out and said, no, this is not happening. But with that, it led to what I call football ultras or football fans, violent football fans, descending on the city, saying they want to come and protect the city. But what they were doing was now going after migrants, black and brown migrants. And they actually attacked 2 Indian boys and put them in hospital. And these were the same men who confronted us. So it was all over the place. And even, I was talking to a Polish person who said, well, I don't advise that you should have come here on your own. You people should have come here with somebody else who speaks Polish, because my Polish is 0. And for many of them, their English is 0 as well. So it was a very difficult situation. It was a very uncomfortable situation.
But these, I can imagine, but these same Africans who said they wanted to come home, interestingly, even in Ghana, we had a number of students who were recording videos and saying, I want to come home, government of Ghana, please come rescue us. But then somewhere along the line, government communicated that there were some people who were even given tickets, and they refused to show up. And they said that they'd rather stay in another country than even come home because there was nothing here for them. Does it speak volumes of exactly what the situation is like in Africa, and why maybe to some extent would rather prefer to be treated, with discrimination instead of coming home because there's really no hope back home?
I think I'd like to look at it from another perspective.
Okay.
Some of these students who who were in Ukraine. Some of them had been there for 5 or 6 years. Some of them were medical students, you know, studying pharmacy, studying dentistry. And some of them had just 3 months to go to their final exams. Now, it's a dilemma for them. Should I go back home to Africa where it's going to cost me more to come back to Europe if I can get back into Ukraine and finish my course? Or should I go to Germany or Hungary or Slovakia, which is nearer, and I can just cross over the border once this war is over? So it's a choice a lot of them had to make. You are right. African governments did offer tickets to, Egypt, Nigeria, Ghana, of course, offered planes to bring people back. But some people did remain back in there. I mean, some of the professionals like Dr. Aofa Gogwa-Bite, who I spoke to. I mean, I was chatting with him on Twitter yesterday, and he's in Germany now where he's conducting online lectures for his students who are now scattered all over the world.
Yeah, and for him, it's great. But then there are some of these students who are now saying that it was a mistake coming back home. And I'll just read this. This was on the 26th of April, 2022. And some of these students in Ghana were saying that everything is slow. It looks like coming to Ghana was a mistake. And they say despite the assurances of securing schools for them, nothing has been done for them. And so maybe for them it would have been better if they had looked for somewhere else to go. Are you recording these same, responses and experiences from maybe the other African countries? And how do you feel about it?
Indeed. Listen, I mean, I bet very much that in the first few hours or days when they fled that fighting in Ukraine, or the last hours that they spent in Ukraine, they wouldn't have been saying Ghana is a bad place to come back to. But, hindsight is always 2020 vision. When you look back, could I have done this? Could I have done that? But I think in all this, what I think is, as Africans, we talk about our government. We have to do more. We have to do more, to ensure that our children don't have to travel to these places to go in search of a better life or in search of an education. I mean, there were people flooding Ghana in the 70s and 80s looking for an education. We had Indians coming to Africa to come and teach because our standards were so high, but all those have now disappeared. So it's long-term planning. I know I was talking to a senior government official recently, and he said, there's so many things African governments need to throw money at, and they can only do one thing at a time. But Bella, I just want to, one of the narratives we heard before we went out to Poland was that African governments were not doing enough to bring their students back home. Now, Bella, you know me very well. I'm not an apologist for any government. I hold all governments to account.
Absolutely.
But that narrative was false. There were so many African government officials on the ground at this border post doing their utmost best to bring their students back home. So I met Nigerian embassy officials, Zimbabweans, Tunisians, Egyptians, Kenyans, Ugandans. They were all there trying to ensure the safe return of their citizens. So sometimes we have to give our governments kudos.
But did they do enough? And I'm asking this because it took a very long time for that last gentleman to be rescued from the city where he was locked. I believe his name is Okwoche King. That's what he's called. It took a very long time. And, in the documentary as well, we saw messages where he was saying that it's really bad here. There's no way out. I'm not sure what to do. I mean, other people were being rescued, but he was, stuck for some reason. And I can just imagine what he was going through at that point and probably thinking that he had been left to his own fate when at that point, even his own government should have found him and rescued him.
Listen, there are two sides to this. Where Okwoche King was in Kherson was, it was the epicenter of the fighting during those early weeks of the war. So even rescuing anybody, even Ukrainians out of Kherson at that point was very difficult for any government at all. But secondly, and this comes from a chat I had with the Zimbabwean ambassador to Germany, who also covers Poland, Hungary, and Slovakia. And she was at the border point there, a lone woman standing there trying to get her people out. Now, she said, because I asked her, I said, do you know how many Zimbabweans are in Ukraine? And she said she doesn't know. She said that's because not all Africans who travel abroad go to their embassies, wherever they are, to go and register. So it's impossible for us to know. I mean, I'm guilty of that. I was telling somebody yesterday, I'm guilty of that. I've lived in the UK for 18 years now. I've never gone to the Nigerian High Commission here to go and register and say I'm a Nigerian living in the UK. You know, I mean, they know because I've gone there to renew my passport a few times, but I've never gone there to register. You know, so if anything happens now, why should they be held accountable for the fact that I am in this country when I have not
Peter,
made my presence known?
The system should work. And I get this. I remember that our foreign affairs minister also did say that unfortunately there are some people who travel outside the country and they refuse to register with the country's embassy. So it's difficult to keep tabs on who is here at what point and what time. But at the same time, we have records of who has left the country, where their last stop was and all of that. If we're not going to these embassies to report or to at least register our presence in those countries, they still have the database, don't they?
Well, so imagine you're traveling to Europe now and you have a Schengen visa, okay? And you take off from Accra and you land in Madrid, okay? And then from Madrid, you take off by train and you go to Paris. And then you take another train and you go to Amsterdam and you go to Berlin because the visa allows you to travel like that. Where does the Ghana government start tracking you to? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I think as individuals, we should make life easier if we go and register ourselves. And I totally understand that we have to keep track of where we are, but it's almost impossible. And like I said, I make no excuses for any government, but we as individuals should also be responsible for our own well-being. And don't forget, you know, Russia had been amassing its forces on the Ukrainian border for 2 months or 3 months before the fighting started. You know, I mean, why didn't you get out?
Yeah.
It's a question that I asked. It's a difficult question to ask, but it's a question that should be asked. You know, why do you have to wait until, because some of the students that we spoke to said, well, we wanted to see whether Russia was actually going to invade. Yes, it makes a lot of sense, you know, but at some point, you also have to take some amount of responsibility for yourself.
What if they couldn't afford? What if they couldn't afford to leave at that point?
There's that as well, you know, and you cannot, I mean, how do you mitigate against that, you know? So what do you do? If you don't have the money to leave the country and your government doesn't know that you are in the country, how do they get you out? It's a catch-22 situation and very difficult to mitigate against.
Absolutely. But I mean, it's not all gloomy. Let's not just paint a gloomy picture. Because I remember that the football agent and his family also spoke highly of the treatment that they also received, you know, at the border, because they said that they even felt like crying even when they were being talked to because they had not been treated like this, you know, in a while. And so it wasn't so bad for all Africans in totality. There were some Africans who were treated properly.
And you're right about that, Bella. I mean, some Africans actually said they were treated very well, especially those Africans who were crossing into places like Hungary and Slovakia. But even at the Polish border, I spoke to some Guineans there who said, you know, they had traveled for like 5 days to get to the Polish border. And they would stop in all these small Ukrainian towns. And people would offer them tea and biscuits, you know, and a warm blanket here and hot water there. And they were very grateful for it, you know. And these were like a group of 5 Guinean boys or gentlemen who were telling me this. So you are right, you know, in the midst of all this ugliness, there were some spots of beauty and of kindness. And we have to also acknowledge that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, before we go, what's your takeaway from this? From you traveling all the way to Ukraine, speaking to some of these Africans, experiencing what they also went through on the grounds as well, coming back home and, you know, living life. There's freedom. You're free to do whatever you want at whatever time and all of that. What is your takeaway from all of this?
Indeed, you know, and I don't take the liberties that I have for granted at any point in time at all. My takeaway, you know, I mean, the war in Ukraine is completely unnecessary. And it's even more so because we don't even know what Russia's end game is. We don't know at what point they will say, okay, this is what we wanted to achieve. We've achieved it, and now we're going to stop. So it's a very painful situation. But I've also learned that, you know, how Africa is labeled the backward continent and wars break out and you know, there's always something terrible happening there. If you have enough mad people in anywhere in the world, war will stop. And that's the madness that is happening in Ukraine. And that's my takeaway from it.
What would you say to African governments at this point?
I think we all have to learn our lessons. You know, it looks so far away, but I remember a few weeks ago when President Nana Akufo-Addo was giving his State of the Nation address to Parliament in Accra, and he said, shots are being fired halfway across the world, but we are feeling the pinch in our pocket. That war may be far away, but its impact on Africa is going to be huge. We're already talking about food shortages. We're also already talking about shortage in construction material, fertilizer. Africa can no longer import fertilizer from Russia. Some people are now having to buy potash from Canada and the like. It's going to affect us really, really badly. Not even in the far future, but in the near future.
But I mean, I was thinking that in Nigeria, there's some hope there because we know of a fertilizer plant that's being put up. So gradually, we're also learning to also look within and see how we can also develop our very own resources as well. So there's some good to that.
Well, you asked me what my advice for governments is.
I'm just asking you what you make of that, by the way.
No, that's the best advice you can give them. We have to now look inwards and, you know, stop looking outwards for solutions to problems that we can solve. You know, why should Nigeria not be able to provide fertilizer? You know, why should we have to import wheat from Russia and Ukraine? We've got some of the most arable land in the world on the African continent. You know, so we have to look inwards and try to do things on our own rather than depending on foreign goods.
Absolutely.
I mean, in Nigeria, we import toothpicks.
Yeah.
Toothpicks.
We do that here as well.
Well, there you go.
Everything, literally. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It is.
It is.
But Peter, thank you so much for speaking to us this morning. I know that BBC Africa Eyes, Not Our War, will air at 11 a.m. on TV3, and so look forward to that very, very eye-opening documentary on what Africans are going through and went through at the various borders as Russia invaded Ukraine. But even before you go, I know it's also heartbreaking that Nigeria is not going to the World Cup, but we're family, right? Aren't we?
You have to put your boots
I had to tease you just a little bit.
Yeah, you have to put your boots in. You've just broken my heart all over again.
I'm so sorry, Peter.
But, you know, I mean, listen, all the 5 African teams that are going to Qatar are my teams, and I'll be supporting all of them.
Oh, you should support Ghana. We're a family. We're literally one.
Well, Ghana won't win the World Cup.
Oh, how? Peter, you'll never know. Never say never. Maybe this will be our first.
True,
and we'll share with Nigeria. Yeah?
True that. Okay. Yeah.
Anyway,
thank you. We'll take that any day.
Thank you so much for speaking to us this morning. Thank you and great work.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Bella. Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. So, yes, we've been speaking to Peter Okwoche, and he is the host of BBC Focus on Africa.